You got the video, and you got the logo on the side, and it's time for another deep dive. The Dusty Rhodes Deep Dive Documentary, An American Dream. Dusty debuted in wrestling in 1967. Trained by Tony Santos in Boston, using his friendship with fellow West Texas alumni, the Funk Brothers and Bobby Duncombe, to bluff his way into working for the company. Starting under the name Dusty Runnels, it wasn't until his debut in Texas when he became Dusty Rhodes. Gary Hart suggested calling him Lonesome Rhodes, but Dusty liked the name Dusty. Gary would become Dusty's first manager in wrestling when Dusty teamed with the Spoiler in Texas. So, can you imagine Dusty Rhodes' name as Lonesome Rhodes instead of Dusty Rhodes? Dusty himself picked the name Dusty Rhodes. Early Days Part 2. By 1968, Dusty was on his way to Kansas City and started teaming with fellow Texan Dickie Murdoch as the Texas Outlaws. The Texas Outlaws would become among the top heel teams in the wrestling world during this era of the 60s and the 70s. Like, they would become one of the top teams in every single territory they went to. Texas, Kansas City, they actually spent some time in Minnesota, with Vern. I actually have an AWA program that I just remembered I actually have from Dusty's time with Vern in the AWA in the mid-70s. But the one note is, for the most part, early in his career, Dusty Rhodes was a heel, not a babyface. It wasn't until Florida when Dusty would become a babyface. By 1974, Dusty had made the move to Florida to team with Pac Song, and also he would reunite with his former manager, and in many ways mentor, I guess you could put it, Gary Hart, as the team would be managed by Gary Hart. But on May 5th, 1974, Dusty and Pac Song worked against Eddie Graham and Mike that night is synonymous, not just because the match ended in a countout, but it is synonymous because it is the night when Dusty turned babyface, and when Dusty cut the promo that started it all. It is the night when the American Dream was born. During his time in Florida, Dusty would be mentored by the legend Eddie Graham, who gave Dusty his first chance to book and learn that side of wrestling. Eddie Graham, by far, Eddie Graham was in every way the father of wrestling booking, mentoring Kevin Sullivan, Dusty Rhodes, Paul Heyman in a way, Bill Watts. Vince Sr. would go to Eddie Graham for booking ideas. And Mike Graham, in many ways, Eddie helped stabilize. Eddie sent Bill Watts up to Georgia to help stabilize the Georgia territory during the Great Georgia War of '72, the Wrestling War of '72. Eddie Graham brought stability to the NWA and mentored numerous future bookers and legends of the business on that side of the wrestling business. And it also would be hard-pressed for me not to say that Dusty probably learned from Dory Funk Sr. in West Texas, where Eddie Graham actually was taught, or actually spent some time. But Dusty would be part of the office in Florida. Dusty would be one of the top stars, if not the top star in Florida. I don't mind kidding. Dusty would be the top star in Florida from '74 till '85. So 11 years Dusty Rhodes was the top star in Florida, or '84 when Dusty left for Jim Crockett Promotions. Dusty would be offered the job of booker in Jim Crockett Promotions after Starrcade 1983. Starrcade 83 was Dusty's idea. The big super card was Dusty's idea. Or was... I don't know if the Final Conflict was Dusty's idea, which took place in March of 83, but Starrcade 83 was Dusty's idea, and after Starrcade 83, he was offered the job of booker in Crockett Promotions, and I believe late 84, early 85 was when he took over the office. And he would bring in, he would wipe out the talent roster in Florida, including J.J. Dillon. J.J. Dillon actually came back from Toronto, or Canada, where he was running. I think he was either in ownership of the office in Toronto or in Canada, or actually I think it was in Toronto. He was either in control of the office or he was actually in control of the office or just the booker up in Toronto. But he wanted to leave and come back home, and Dusty called him with the job in Crockett Promotions to become his co-booker or his detail guy. Dusty would do the book, and then JJ would go over it, fine-tune it, correct the, shorthand or whatever the case may be, but JJ would be Dusty's right-hand man. Dusty would become, again, one of the biggest stars in wrestling. Not just in the territory this time, though. Dusty spent a while in Florida. Dusty would go up to New York because of Eddie's association with Vince Sr. and sell out Madison Square Garden with Superstar Graham. That's when Dusty would cut the promo, I've wined and dined with kings and queens, slept in alleys, and feasted on pork and beans. But Dusty would become one of the biggest stars in the business as a part of Jim Crockett Promotions, thanks in part to Crockett Promotions being on TBS, which they weren't on TBS until late 84, early 85, which lines up perfectly. And while in this era, Dusty would become a 3-time world champion. One of his world titles was held in Florida. The other 2 were held in Crockett Promotions. I'm pretty sure. Or 2 of them were held before Crockett Promotions, and the last one was in Crockett Promotions. Dusty's genius. During his time in JCP, Dusty would team with Magnum TA and Nikita. Actually, with both of them, he would team with Magnum first, and then after Magnum's injury, car accident, he would team with Nikita, and both of them won the tag belts. Both of them competed in War Games together, the Superpowers, and I forget what his team with Magnum was called, but his team with Nikita was the Superpowers. But Dusty Rhodes was the man behind the creation of the Great American Bash, the creation of Starrcade, the creation of the Bunkhouse Stampede and the Bunkhouse Match, the War Games, and a number of other creations. But also Dusty was behind Dusty's eye for talent. From the time Sting walked through those doors in 1988 after purchasing UWF, Sting was protected by Dusty Rhodes. Sting was developed by Dusty Rhodes. Within a year, Sting was a main event talent. From 1987 till the end of 1988, Sting was the only star to flourish after Crockett Promotions bought out the UWF. And that's a lot of it placed on the shoulders of the American Dream. And Big Bubba Rogers. Big Bubba Rogers came in for a spot as a local talent, worked a match with Tully Blanchard, and was able to take the slingshot suplex, which was Tully's finisher at the time. Dusty noticed it and pulled Bubba aside and gave Bubba a spot. He recognized it because of the talent that Bubba showed, being able to be a man of his size, 300 plus pounds, being a man of his size, and being able to take a move like that. So Bubba was taken off TV for like a month, and then brought back as Cornette's bodyguard. And because of his run in Crockett Promotions, because of his run, thanks to Dusty, he went on to become the most profitable opponent for Hulk Hogan during Hogan's run in the mid-'80s as WWF Champion. Look at the numbers. Thanks to Dusty Rhodes, Boss Man became the Big Boss Man. And I'll mention it later. I'll mention it again later. But Dusty Rhodes is in part to thank for Diamond Dallas Page becoming a professional wrestler, and apparently Missy Hyatt credits Dusty for her career as well. Which Missy probably came over in the... Would Missy have come over in the UWF deal? I don't know. She might have. She might have, yeah. During his feud with Flair over the NWA World's title in October of '85, the American Dream would deliver one of the greatest promos in wrestling history. And if you don't believe me, watch the promo. And if you don't get goosebumps, you are dead inside, because for 30 years, you work in a factory. They look you in the eyes, give you a watch, and tell you, let's start over. You work at a job for 30 years. They look you in the eyes and tell you a computer took your job, Daddy. Wait. That's third time's the charm. For 30 years. They give you a watch, kick you in the butt, and tell you a computer took your job, Daddy. That's hard times. That's hard times. And Ric Flair, you put hard times on Dusty Rhodes. You put hard times on the American Dream and his family. But I've come back. I'm getting goosebumps just quoting it, and I'm quoting it wrong. Watch the promo if you've never seen it. That's actually, the picture is actually from this promo, I'm pretty sure. Take my hand. This is my hand. It is in your hand. In the greatest collaboration. It was promotion for Starrcade '85. It was promotion for Flair versus Dusty at Starrcade '85, which I would believe would be one of Dusty's NWA title reigns later in his career. Dusty would be removed from Booker following Starrcade '88 after an angle he shot with the Road Warriors where he got spiked in the eye by one of the Road Warriors' spikes as he was trying to turn the Road Warriors heel. But a anti-blood policy, or a blood spotting policy, put in place by parent company Turner Broadcasting, who just took over earlier that month, because Starrcade had always been a November, a Thanksgiving tradition, like Survivor Series. The parent company, Turner Broadcasting from the start, which, ironically enough, this blood spotting policy is actually what got Dustin fired in '94 or early '95, which brought Dustin over to WWF and started Goldust. So, ironically enough, the same blood spotting, the anti-blood policy that Turner Broadcasting had in place that took Dusty out, actually took Dustin out too. Dusty spent some time floating around territories and independent companies before debuting in WWE in mid-1989. Infamously, this is when Dusty would begin wearing his polka dots, donning the nickname of the Common Man. And if his theme song wasn't copyrighted still, this would be when I would play his theme song. But if you want to hear his theme song, either look it up on YouTube or play one of WWE's games where Dusty Rhodes is a legend, because that is always his theme song. While in WWF, Dusty would have heated feuds with both Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase, giving fans 2 dream matches we didn't even know he wanted. Following his departure from WWF in 1991, that would mark the end of Dusty's full-time in-ring career. It was during this time when Dusty introduced us to Sapphire. The sweet Sapphire. Sweet Sapphire. And Sapphire and Dusty would feud with Randy and Sherry. And then later, Ted would... I'm trying to remember, is that when... No, Sherry went with Ted later. So it was probably when Ted was trying to take everything away from Dusty, and he got Sapphire to turn on Dusty, and that's when Dustin had his first run into WWF. In late 1990, early 1991, Dustin had his first feud with Dusty. Because also, I just want to point out, it was DiBiase and Dusty's feud at Survivor Series, their traditional Survivor Series elimination match, which brought The Undertaker into the WWE. Dusty would return to the WCW as a member of the booking committee in 1991, and things had changed a lot since he left in 1989. Because Turner Broadcasting was now in full control. If I remember correctly, 1991 was when Jim Herd had stepped down. No, 92 was when Jim Herd stepped down. So by the time Dusty came back, because Dusty came back in the spring of 91, basically, Dusty came back, Flair left. But Dusty coming back had nothing to do with Flair leaving. Flair stepped down. Basically, Dusty took Flair's spot on the booking committee because Flair stepped down because of Jim Herd, and Dusty took Flair's spot. But the one difference was, this time, Dusty was not going to be the booker. He had to be on a committee. Dusty would compete a handful of times in his second stint with the WCW, fully stepping back from the ring to become a color commentator, specifically on WCW Saturday Night and pay-per-views. The last match I recollect from this time for Dusty Rhodes was at, I want to say Fall Brawl, or was War Games, in 1994, because him and Dustin had an emotional back and forth during him and Dustin had an emotional back and forth where Dustin forgave his father and allowed his father to team with him against the stud stable, which was Robert Fuller, Jimmy Golden, Arn Anderson was in it, Terry Funk was in it. See, if I looked up Dusty Rhodes' last match, it would come up with Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair in 2001. Not the last match I'm thinking of, but no, it's 90. Actually, I was right. Dusty's last match of recollection was a run with Dustin against the stud stable, and there was a Fall Brawl War Games. But with the Nasty Boys, low budget War Games. But then he had a house show loop with Dustin against the stud stable in cage matches, and he would actually return teaming with Kevin Nash against the Public Enemy on an episode of Thunder in 1998, but I didn't even know that existed because, I try and forget Dusty in the NWO. Dusty was in the booth for the legendary Bash at the Beach event in 1996. If you watched Mafu Botchmania, or Botchamania, you got Dusty's call where he picked up the bicycle, or that'll make a back crack, liver quiver, knees freeze. Some Dusty isms in coming about. Dusty would be let go from the WCW due to budget cuts in 2000. After Brad Siegel, this was late 2000, or I think it was early 2000 actually, because it was right when JJ and what's his name? Crap, what was the accountant's name? It was right after the change in power when Bischoff stepped away. But Dusty would leave and would actually show up in ECW, which was surprising because nobody expected Dusty to show up in ECW. And he would spend a short period of time in ECW feuding with the king of old school, Steve Corino. Steve Corino was still a relative newcomer in ECW, unproven, but his feud with Dusty Rhodes would make Steve Corino a star for ECW. And right after his feud with Dusty, near the end of 2000, Steve would become ECW World Heavyweight Champion, and in many ways you could credit his run as ECW Champion to his feud with Dusty Rhodes getting him over. Dusty Rhodes would, actually that's supposed to be early 2001, Dusty would then return to WCW, reuniting with his son Dustin, who had just returned to WCW as well, against Flair and Jeff Jarrett. And surprisingly, people might not know this, but Dusty's return did pop the ratings. Dusty's return did help WCW because people were seeing people that they wanted to see. Dusty still had star power. Dusty still had the ability to get attention. Dusty still had the ability to get people to notice him. And people still wanted to see Dusty Rhodes because Dusty had been on TV at that point probably for at least a year. National television. The ECW was on TNN, but the same people that were watching WCW were not watching ECW because it's not what they wanted to see. But Dusty and Flair, people still wanted to see Dusty and Flair one last time. Because it was something they hadn't seen in a long, long time. Because when Hogan came in to WCW, it helped. But the shift started. The shift away from what was to what it became started. And then when Russo came in, another shift happened. Because Bischoff was aware of what his crowd wanted. Russo wasn't, in my opinion. But that's for the Vince Russo deep dive and the Eric Bischoff deep dive. But WCW was sold to WWE in March of 2001, as everybody knows, and the rest is history. But something a lot of people don't know is that Dusty actually opened up his own promotion, Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling, while he was gone from WCW in 2000. The promotion would close in 2003, but it would be the home for Dusty Rhodes. It would be Dusty's home while he was away. And a lot of local talent, from Florida and Georgia, the southeast region, Dusty's home, would call that promotion home, or, there'd be a lot of WCW, ex-WCW guys, ex-WWF guys that were released during that time. I think Road Dogg may have spent some time there. I think Dustin probably did, in between his stints with WCW and WWE. Jay Biggs did. Tajiri, Super Crazy, Simon Diamond, Steve Corino, Barry Windham, Kendall, C.W. Anderson, Bullet Bob, Scott Armstrong, Manny Fernandez, Bobby Eaton, Leilani Kai, Malia Hoseka, Steve Lawler, Ray Gordy, a lot of guys. Scotty Riggs, Glacier, Lodi, Eric Watts, Jorge Estrada, The Public Enemy, Big Ron Studd, which actually was Ron Reese in WCW for the Flock. A lot of guys ended up with Dusty in TCW. But by 2003, TCW was gone. And it didn't take long for Mr. Dusty Rhodes to find a new home, because in 2003, Dusty started working for, and I never corrected authority, but he started working for the young upstart company, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. Dusty would feud with the top heel faction, which was led by Vince Russo, Sports Entertainment Extreme. Dusty would become the authority figure at some point, the matchmaker, the liaison from the championship committee. Dusty would also become the head booker around Victory Road and would be announced as the authority figure at Victory Road 2004, which was TNA's first pay-per-view. And by spring of 2005, though, Dusty would be asked to become a member of the creative team. You know, Dusty, as a member of TNA, is forgettable because of how short his run with TNA was. But the reality of the situation is, a 2-year run, it's not that short. It's just that at that time, that's when TNA was on Fox Sports Fox Sportsnet, I think, was where they had their pay-per-views, their weekly pay-per-views. So that's before TNA started having the monthly exposure, because in the fall of 2005 is actually when TNA got on Spike. You know, in October 2005 is when TNA got on Spike, because in 2005, that's also when WWE returned home. And speaking of returning home, Dusty also wasn't unemployed for that long after leaving TNA in the spring, because he would return to WWE in 2005 and finally gain the respect he deserved, because he was treated like a legend. And he was treated like a legend. In 2007, Dusty Rhodes would be inducted into the Hall of Fame. See, I don't know what caused WWE to stop doing the Hall of Fame inductions, but it's also the fact that I think, to a degree, the Hall of Fame inductions WWE would be struggling to fill up Hall of Fame classes had they not stopped in 1996 and restarted in 2004. But I also think, picking the right place, Dusty Rhodes could have headlined the 2007 class. I don't know if he did or not, but I don't think he did. I don't think he did. 2007 Hall of Fame was in Detroit. Oh no, he did. Dusty, Mr. Perfect, Jerry Lawler, Mick Bockwinkel, Jim Ross, Mr. Fuji, The Sheik, and the Wild Samoans. I definitely think that The Sheik could have headlined that thing, and then they could have saved Dusty for the following year in Florida, which, hindsight being what it is, if they knew they were going to Florida the next year, I would have saved Dusty for the following year, just like I would have saved Jerry Lawler for the following year. Because Lawler's bigger in the Southeast than he is in Detroit. Dusty was a legend, an icon in Florida. And Florida's, 8 hours away from North Carolina? Just saying. It was Dusty's old stomping ground for, 20 years? Actually, 17, I think. In 2009, Dusty had a feud with Randy Orton at the height of Randy's legacy, at the height of Randy as the Legend Killer, at the height of Randy being the Viper, at the height of Randy being his most ferocious, his most vicious. I remember Randy and Dusty having a bull rope match, and I remember that feud. I remember Dusty getting RKO'd in the ring when Dusty helped Randy and Legacy. Dusty was the guest host one night. Dusty booked the 6-man tag. He turned on DX, helped Legacy win, and then Randy still dropped him with the RKO. But I remember that. That was one of the few highlights. And in 2013, speaking of highlights, Dusty would return to WWE television to second his kids, Dustin and Cody, in their feud against the Authority, which was the best programming, in my opinion, some of the best programming they did during that entire time. Because the only highlight, because think about it, you had Daniel Bryan with Randy, you had Cody and Dustin with the Shield. Everything was hitting on all cylinders, but everything else on the show sucked. That's the problem. Everything else on the show sucked. But it was the first time, and to my knowledge, that was the first time that the three of them were on the television, or were on TV together, since the 2007 Hall of Fame. But this is also where Dusty had the infamous angle where he put up his hand when he was cutting a promo. He put up his hand when I think it was him, Hunter, and Steph were in the ring, and Steph was talking to him, interrupting Dusty. Dusty put up his hand and caught heat from Steph for putting up his hand and putting his hand in front of Steph's face during the promo. It is hard to put into words the amount. You can't have a deep dive about Dusty Rhodes without talking about NXT. It is hard to put into words the amount of influence that Dusty had over the development of NXT as a brand and a developmental facility. The amount of talent that Dusty influenced down there, and they have gone on record multiple times saying they don't know where they'd be without Dusty Rhodes, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder, or Dash Hardwood and whatever their names are in FTR, Kevin Owens, Becky Lynch, Seth Rollins. The amount of talent that you can look up and down the WWE roster, and I guarantee you a number of them, if not all of them, will say that Dusty influenced them in some way because of where they came from, because most of the roster that is on WWE's payroll right now came from NXT. Even AJ Styles, who worked with Dusty in TNA. Dusty has a far-reaching legacy. And Dusty's legacy is honored every year with the Dusty Rhodes Classic in NXT. The American Dream is in every sense of the word an icon of the wrestling industry. It is hard to explain the impact that he had on the wrestling business as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, Dallas Page would likely not have gotten into the wrestling business if not for Dusty Rhodes. Because Dallas has told this story more than once, that he called Dusty and expressed his doubts to Dusty about becoming a wrestler. Dusty talked him out of it. In October 2019, AEW renamed the Gorilla position after Dusty Rhodes, calling it the Dusty position. As another way to honor Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes passed away in June 2015. Kidney failure. We lost Dusty. We lost Roddy. We lost Buddy Landell. We lost China. All in the span of a short period of time. I remember finding out that Dusty passed away. And that is the first time that that's the first time I cried when a wrestler passed away. I look at Dusty as one of my idols of the wrestling business because he gave his life to wrestling. His mind was wrestling. He could not get it out. He could not, till the day he passed away, he was a part of the wrestling business. He had it in his blood. From 2015, when Dusty Rhodes passed away, sorry for dropping my phone too loud. from 2015 till from 2015 when Dusty passed till 1967. Going back to 1967. That's 48 years. Dusty Rhodes stayed in the wrestling business for 48 years. If that's not love, I don't know what is. If that's not something you're passionate about, I don't know what is. I honestly don't. Dusty showed his passion every day for the wrestling business. He went out of his way to influence, to help, to develop, to create. And we honor him for that. Dusty is an icon. He is a legend. And he will always be the American dream. Because if there's one thing that Dusty did, is that he did not just live the American dream. He lived a dream. Because for 48 years he was able to make money, a lot of money, doing a job he loved every single day. He was honored every single day by those around him. People looked to him and it would be, sit under the learning tree and learn, as Ernie Ladd would say. People would sit next to Dusty. Dusty taught promo class at the NXT train at the Performance Center, and now they have a puppet of Dusty in the promo classroom because Dusty is still watching over the students. Dusty's still there. Dusty is still present. Dusty is still there. I knew this would be the hardest part to talk about because I thought tears would be for me, but I'm just getting goosebumps talking about the American dream because the American dream is still somebody I idolize to this day, to the point of where I said at an interview, the interviewer asked me, who do you idolize? And I said Dusty Rhodes. The fact of the matter is, the American dream what else is there to say? Other than he wined and dined with kings and queens, slept in alleys and ate pork and beans. But if you thought you put hard times on the American dream, I'll show you hard times, Ric Flair. I'll show you hard times. But I think the best way to end this documentary is like this. I know my Dusty Rhodes impression is not that good, but it's something. I'm gonna reach out now. I want you at home to know my hand is touching your hand for the biggest gathering of the biggest body of people in this country, in this universe, all over this world. All over the world now, reaching out because the love you gave me, that was given me, and this time I will repay you now, because I will be the next world's heavyweight champion on this Hard Time Blues Dusty Rhodes Tour 85. And Ric Flair, Nature Boy, let me leave you with this. One way to hurt Ric Flair is to take what he cherishes more than anything in the world, and that's the world's heavyweight title. I'm gonna take it. I've been there twice. This time, when I take it, I'm gonna take it for you. Let's gather for it. Don't let me down, 'cause I came back for you. For that man upstairs that died 10, 12 years ago and never got the opportunity to see a real world's champion. And I'm proud of you. Thank God I have you. And I love you. That's my outro. Peace for now. I hope you enjoyed The American Dream. This, the Dusty Rhodes Deep Dive documentary.